And
I was panicking, I
he was
just wanted to be out of there in
panicking.
10 minutes. We were 11?
You're good.
13.
We're trying to French it up.
Okay.
That was
French
bad.
dip.
Yeah, Joe
I'm
Dirt
not-
Day.
Okay, let's just. Okay. Let's move on to continue with item 2.4, MDAs. Kind of like I was saying, I think we want to kind of focus on uses. Today just permitted what we'd like to see in that again.
So there are four MDAs. The first one, let me get the page number.
Starts on 187.
Before we dig into the meat, can I ask a general question? Like in this context, been a few meetings since we were there, but I remember what the justification or what the reasoning was to ask for MDAs. The general question still remains like why, what's in it for the city? Why would we do MDAs on top of the zone? So for us, just so staff knows as reading through these, at least for me, that's how I'm looking at each one of these is they're somewhat tied together, but to me that's for the landscaping and continuity, that's all great, like I said before, but each one, what's the core concept, what's the purpose of it, what is it doing and what are we getting out of it? If that makes sense. We change the zone text and they can do all of this, approve that and the PID, they can do all of this right away. There's no need for any of this, right? Am I wrong procedurally?
That's correct.
The only, yeah.
So to me, the MDA is an overlay that gives them more flexibility. But what are we getting from it that we aren't getting from the zone?
Well, I know you had asked me about that, but I think one of them got brought up. If we do wanna look at trying to do a min-max, like if we wanna put a requirement on some used, we can't do that
So we can put a
right now.
ratio in the,
Yeah, so it might be something like that we wanna look at. Yeah, that we have to put in an NDA now, would have to be.
I'm just saying that's to me the criteria for each one, right? What, if we're gonna give up the certainty we have with the zoning, then what are the things that we get in return?
Cause there's always,
That's just a lens, I guess.
there's always the risk with an MVA. As we move forward and as things develop, they're locked in to everything we have right now. So if in 5 years from now, things change and we needed to do this big of this, or it just doesn't matter, they're locked in, I hate MVAs.
Well,
But
to
it
me,
also binds them to what we want in this room right now.
yeah, well, it's
rather
kinda
than-
like,
Does that though too.
No, because council can change them.
that's the thing is that we can.
Future council can't change our agreement unless the
Unless the developer.
So that's the
agrees
difference
to,
is
yeah.
the zone, with just a zone, we control it, right? We do. With an MDA, then if we ever wanna change it, they have to agree. It's
true.
different, it's an agreement versus a legislative.
So it goes
Tool.
with.
Yeah, yeah.
And to me, I think the last one, the Teton business thing
Yeah.
is a good one where, okay, they want, I think for a relatively benign purpose, right? To me, it's to bypass the process for each building permit to come in and get the same approval that they're gonna get for everything else. That makes sense to me, it's a good tool to use to streamline things for everybody, right, and still get the desired result, but what can we do? We can make sure that the bigger building doesn't become a school or a church and we don't have any commercial use there at all, right? So we can add that to it. So for me, as we're looking through each of these, to me, that's the lens is we don't need them. They're not needed for this really at all. So if they want them for their flexibility for whatever, then what, is it worth it for us to get what we're getting from them? Right, is there something we're getting and is it worth it? That's I just think sometimes we get going down these roads and we feel like we have to do this. The zone and the PID get them going, they can do it all tomorrow, right? The hotel can go in the C2 that we rezoned 2 weeks ago. The MDA, all it does is allow auto mall use, which if they came in with someone that wanted to use it, then you just make that application, it comes to us and we go, yeah, we'll let you do that. Change the zone. But there's no need, the MDA in this case to me is just bypassing that deliberative public process to vet everything out, right? The difference in uses right? What are the issues with that? The planning commission weighs in, comes back to us, that's a legislative thing. I think all of us have said with some of those, I don't think anybody has an issue with it, but can we think through all of those things ahead of time? Because once we sign it, that's what it is, it doesn't come back, right? There's no contingency. So there's more risk on our end that we miss something by bypassing that process. So if we can get it all right, great, and if we're getting some assurances, that was the word that was used, I went back and looked at my notes. And the only justification for these was that they would like some assurances that they get some things. Like, well, okay, then, and the question was posed by our attorney, well, what does the city get? What we're getting already. Right, so are there some of these things that we can tighten it up with, the ratios, or are there things that make sense for us to add to these, that it makes sense to bypass that process to give us further assurances? That's.
So I guess maybe even before we go, even before we go down that road then, are we,
Does this tool offer us, or, I mean, I know it offers them a quicker way to get building and boots and dirt moving on the ground, essentially?
The NDA does not,
Doesn't.
specifically the text amendment does.
Right.
So I think there are multiple MDAs and they each impact it a little differently.
That was my
So I
next
guess
step.
that's kind of the next thing is at least for me, I'm looking at each one separately. To me, the only common thing is the landscaping and signage, and quite honestly, planning commission's recommendations there, engineering's recommendations, I don't wanna get into the weeds and all that. I'm good with that. What I'm more concerned about is the core concepts, right? So the main auto mall MDA, what's different about that than what's already in the zone? Is it just that, is it worth it for us to do an MDA on that piece? Just to do the landscaping stuff? If so, it ties in with the rest, great, but the rest sticks with the zone. Or is there extra stuff like the ratio that we wanna put in there that protects us further? Great.
I think that's the purpose of this, the MDA, so the first one up, I believe, is auto mall.
So I guess that's what, at least I'd like to focus on, is that core concept. Should we do an MDA for this project, for this section, for what reasons, right?
My take is in at least in this particular instance, they're not massive gives or takes, right?
There's
not.
one that is, but the others I agree.
Right.
And so I say, so is it just, is there enough that we get out of it? And let's talk about those core concepts before we get in the weeds of all the
But
landscape.
I think it is the ability to have a cohesive development, right, in appearance and aesthetics and I don't know that that's necessarily extraordinarily valuable per se, it's hard to quantify that necessarily, but I think from a desirability standpoint, I think we'd all agree that's something we
Yeah, and
would
I
like.
think
And I
that's
don't know that it's,
I think it's the planning commission's job anyway, but like I said, I'm fine with using this tool to streamline that, and
Sure.
it's quicker for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. But are we, by doing that, is that the only desired outcome? Or are there other things by each area that we need to tie up? And I guess that's what I wanna focus on, is those specific things for each separate one. Cause it seems like the only common part of them all is that part.
well, yeah, but I mean, if I could, I wasn't necessarily prepared to delineate all that stuff, or enumerate it, but, design standards, landscaping, signage, min-maxes, frontage, all those things that we wanna control, we can dictate through the MDA and
You can also do it through zoning though.
It is.
Which is what we just did.
So
The
we
text
did.
amendment, we handled
That was
most of
all
that
in
stuff through the text amendment.
That's all in there. So really what the MDA does is it literally bypasses the process of checking those boxes on all those things for each application that comes in. Right, so they sell off this parcel to that user, they wanna build whatever they're building. Here's the zone, has to go through the process, the planning commission, does it follow all the things that are laid out in the zone? Right, the MDA basically says you don't have to do that to as much of an extent, still a little bit, right, but not to, and to me, that's okay, that we streamline all that. But it's different, right, if it's a zone, we control it and can change it in the future. If it's the MDA, we can't. So can we think through all of that, and are we getting further assurances that we're willing to bypass that? I think that we may, but before we talk about wording and landscaping and all the minutia, like are we all agreed on the core concepts of each of these four?
You know, you bring that up, that's something that I had asked that we do in these, in the past, was when we write these up, that we have a recitals section that talks about, highlights
Gives
what
and takes.
exactly, you know, the interest is, and, you know, when I read this one, it was, basically saying, the development of the property will result in, is F, by the way.
This is the general boilerplate.
Yeah, well, it's the parties acknowledge that the development of the property will result in planning and economic benefit to the city and its residents by, among other things, requiring orderly development, in-place remediation of imported soils containing heavy metals, and prohibiting certain less desirable uses.
And that's what the zoning process already does, right? So I think to your point, you had mentioned that when you'd called in, that the one meeting we had talked about some of this in
Right.
general. And I think, I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but we were talking about what are the specifics for this project? That's the general boilerplate, but what are the specific the assurances,
Right.
to put it that way? We don't want performance-based, but the further assurances that we get by using this tool, right?
Okay, so with that in mind, should we start on Automo?
I
Well, I think that's
a great one
the
to start at,
Your
because
simplest one,
setting the
maybe.
table on that discussion there, as
So they're like, they're
Jared
all the
was
same,
saying,
right?
the Automall, as we started reviewing it, Todd was looking through it, all of the AMSD text was just copied and pasted there.
From zoning.
So as we looked and we were
Right.
like, well, what's really different? So really, the only purpose for an AMSD MDA would be if you wanted to do some specific things, like put a specific site plan. Or we talked about the ratio.
Percentages.
Is there a ratio that 1/2, 4:1, 5:1, 3:1, whatever it is? Specific things like that, because I think they did a great job on the text. It covered a lot of the concerns, because it's the one area where we have a zone that is just that area. And so
Right.
we could write it specifically for that and not have these downstream effects on other areas.
That's kind of what got me thinking along these lines as I'm reading them, like this is, all we're doing with this MDA is pointing to the zone, like what's the point?
Do we need
And you could even text them and say, well, only X percentage of the
Yeah.
development can be used, right? I mean,
But that's
I
where
think
it
it's-
gets a little more,
There's discussion about
Difficult.
adding other areas too, where we talked about.
But it could be
Point and the city properties and what can be incorporated in, but
Yeah, I think you're,
they're already AMSD.
I mean, if the MDA, understand, they would like the MDA, if we're gonna use it, this would be where you'd put your ratios. I think it makes more sense in the MDA, because this is an agreement between that property owner, it's not a zone. Because, if it's a zone, think of it this way, a zone, you can only have this. Well, I come in on my property and I put my used ones, so now the next person on the zone has to do new, and they don't have a choice.
Right.
I don't think that's appropriate in a zone. It could be in an MDA where they're doing multiple properties, you're saying we want a ratio. Because it's an agreement, I don't think you would put
Yeah,
that.
could you write in a zone, it would,
it's a good,
there's
Multiple people could own
yeah,
the
an
property.
early adopter could get a benefit that the later one wouldn't get for the same zoning, yeah, that makes sense.
So-
Do you have to have an MDA to get a PID?
but in this case, it's,
No,
in this case, it's one and the same.
It is right now, cause you're talking about, but they start selling off different
So
pieces
it's
of
still
property.
part of it. No, I
So
guess
once-
you're right.
once they
So
sell, once
it's right.
individual
So if
owners,
it's
then
MDA, it's
they're-
all, that's all still part of the MDA.
Correct.
Gotcha, okay.
But if it's zoning, now
It's
it's,
zone,
now
then
now
the
you've got
others are-
individuals with property rights that are being.
So that
impacted
alone to me is
because-
enough to have an MDA on the Automo then.
If you wanna use that
Personal
ratio,
road
I
trip,
would
yeah,
use the
ratios.
MDA model.
It's not currently in there.
It's not in there, that's one of the things we talked about
And
is,
And so kind of what I was thinking with the text change discussion was, look, and Bruce said, we don't know if we'll be okay with that, but if we're talking about using this tool and assurances to get what we set out to get, then it makes sense to have it in the NDA, so then we have to think through, well, if they say, no, we don't wanna use that, we don't need an MDA in that area, let's just go with the text change, then we need to go back to the text change and make sure we have
Tighten it
language
up.
that not necessarily add a ratio per se, but tighten up the language, cause right now we're anticipating it on the MDA tightening up. language. So that's just for you, more you two. Right, to
And
think-
as
to
you
think
think through
about.
that, that's a great point to bring up, because we're anticipating is.
Cause we do the
items
zone,
get
we do the
adopted,
text change, they
they'll
can
the
go ahead and
text
do that,
amendment
however
first
that's
in the
written.
council, in the regular meeting, and then you'll work through it afterwards.
Like I said, cause these MDAs are not needed for them to do anything, all it's needed is the text change. Right, we approved the PID, they have funding,
I think specifically for the AMSD property, they're not proposing to deviate from that. The other three MDAs, they are proposing some type of deviation
From the zoning and.
from the zoning.
So those ones, as we talked earlier, the MDAs have different, their request, they need those
so I say
MDAs
those
on the
ones
other
they're asking
This
for a lot
one's-
more, which is different.
Right, you're good.
That's why I think this one is the easiest one to start with.
Right.
Because it really is just that issue. So, ratio.
See, I struggle with the ratio, the more I've thought about it, I did some research this week, cause we had talked about it. I worry about talking to Colby, right, and talking to Colby. Colby's gonna be a major player in helping this. There's a certain, I mean, if we just put, in my opinion, if we just put in the design standards, we put in these minimums.
Yeah, minimum
I don't know that
size.
it really,
Cause here's the thing is we can always change it. Right, so if it's not working and they come back and say, you know, for these reasons, Colby says, you know, I really need you guys to change this so I can do X, Y, Z, we can always do that. But if we're left exposed,
but we've incentivized new
we can't,
more, we've
right?
incentivized new
Yeah,
with
it's
our
already in
TIF.
that, that's in the.
With our tip, we
yeah.
highly incentivize new more. Again, I don't know that it,
But-
with the buildings we're asking for, again, I know and I'm new, we're new, I wasn't here when the initial discussions. I don't,
It's evolved, let's just put it that way.
it's absolutely evolved. I
Well,
would
we
love
wanna
to see
have-
new, I would love to
we
see
wanna have
new.
incentives and we wanna do as much as we
But-
can to have them turn over to that, but I don't wanna prohibit other things that.
Here, that's my
Here's
concern,
the
if we have
difference.
a ratio, I'm concerned
Yeah.
about a limit.
I would agree. And I think that the opposition to used is really kind of twofold. Number one is the idea that you would be selling vehicles at a lower cost than a new dealership and it would generate less sales tax revenue, right? Second thing is that the aesthetics of used car dealerships tend to be substandard to a new car dealership. And we want this to appear as aesthetically pleasing no matter what they're selling, right? So I think that we can. I think used car prices are extraordinarily high right now. That's probably not, I mean, I was looking at, National Auto Plaza, just was gathering, I mean, they have trucks selling for over 6 figures all over the place over there. I'm like,
Yep.
holy
The
cow.
tires and the lift on it, you're done.
Yeah.
It's like a mortgage,
yeah, it was-
10-year.
it was
loan
crazy.
thing. But I think,
but
the
then the-
point is, like,
so
the sales tax.
I'm not as
issue,
concerned,
right?
I'm not as concerned about that part of it, because I think used car sales are just robust. They sell a ton of them.
Sales tax is sales tax.
Right. On the other hand, if we through the text addressed the design standards and the minimum size, I think we controlled the aesthetic concern.
Agree.
I don't know that I have any other real concerns.
They
Like,
just,
I don't,
you know,
the
part of
ratio
that-
isn't as that important to me.
Congruency of signage and landscaping.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
I think along with the aesthetics to me is, I wanna see real investment in the ground, right? So part of this, the aesthetic thing with used cars is they come and go like crazy and it's just asphalt and a shack and
Right.
that's it, there's no investment. It's, I think with this, we wanna have a platform where what we're being told actually happens, that we're using these to show volume to turn them into new.
The Travis
Right,
idea.
that's what we're being,
Yeah.
that's what we're being pitched and sold, and so by doing some of those things that you mentioned, if we do it right, I think those building blocks are in place to encourage that, and if the market is right, then that will happen because we put those in place. But it's what are those metrics on building size and whatever else, right? I mean, even if it's, cause there's a whole bunch of what ifs and who knows, and that's kind of the issue is if we, and that's to me the difference between a zone and the MDA, the zone, we can change. Like literally, the, you know, whatever the time period is between amendments, we can amend it. Chevrolet comes in, says we want this, okay. 2 weeks later, done, right? It's an MDA and there's something that isn't working, we wanna change it, it's an agreement between two parties, the other party has to agree.
So let me ask this then, MDA then on, yes or no, MDA for Automall?
Maybe, I think it's still the answer.
Can we restrict landscaping and signage on that zone, on the Automall zone? It's a one zone, right?
I think it's already in there in
It's
that
already
text
in there.
amendment.
Yeah, it's all pretty much in there.
We let them do the same number of trees, they just could space them further for displays, we
Yeah.
have pedestal displays.
You could use the MDA to call out some of those things that, again, what is in it for the city, if you're encouraging them to landscape the trail that's along Midas Creek or something. You could use the MDA to call it, that's their obligation, they're gonna do that.
Could you use the MDA to trigger
I mean, you gotta
phases
negotiate with them.
and you have to do Automall Drive first and infrastructure first?
You could definitely call out some.
I mean, that's where you would get some of the teeth, right?
But it's just for that area.
Yeah, it'd just be for that one area, yeah.
I guess I'd say before I'm ready to make that decision one way or the other, I think I would like to hear maybe a justification for it.
Of the why.
Right. Why should we do this? What is it, the specific things that you're hoping to achieve? Maybe have the
Or
city
that-
staff say, these are the things that we can only achieve through the MDA, that we
Or
can't
this
achieve, yeah, through this MDA, right? Here's the items that we can't achieve through the text amendment, they can only be achieved through the MDA, and these would be the things we get. Just as a kind of a pros and cons evaluation, right? Again, I don't know that there's an opposition to it, but then again, I'm not 100% sure there's a justification for it either
Exactly.
at this point, right? So I'd like to hear both of those before I make that final decision.
We okay asking? We got two parties here, we okay asking that question?
Are you asking us, are there things that we feel like we as staff that we would?
Yeah, any recommendations was I would say, these are the items that have been discussed, we've heard council talk about the goals that we have, the things that we're looking for. Are there things that we can only achieve those through the
Yeah, it's
MDA?
a question for us,
First
not
step,
them.
right? That's our question
Yeah.
for staff, and then the question would be for the developer to answer the question is, what is their specific request that they need the MDA for? Or would like the MDA for, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a preference,
Yeah.
and that's okay too.
So if,
Yeah, you can ask for anything,
Sure.
I would,
I would tell the kids, go ask mom, maybe you get lucky.
so that, their question, they'll have to answer. I would say if there are things you want to ask or negotiate that are beyond the zone, right? Cause zoning is also a you can only zone so far, you start to run into some takings issues if you start putting up a bunch. Again, MDA is a negotiated agreement, so if there are certain things you feel like you have to have, or you want to ensure that go beyond what that zone say, right? Cause they're gonna get some value by having the surety, what's it in for the city, I think that's where
That's our
council-
question
Yeah.
to you guys.
I didn't see any.
We're
What's the quid pro quo,
For the Automall,
right? If
as
there's-
it's written, it doesn't have anything additional, it's handled in the MSD.
It's a vesting tool.
For
because
them,
there's-
right?
For them.
Yeah, but it doesn't do anything
So-
for us.
When we posed the
person-
question to the developer, they said with a scale of what they're wanting to do, it helps them market the properties to others if the people that are buying have that assurance.
assurance of what?
Assurance that zoning is gonna be there without it changing.
Zoning doesn't change.
I mean, the
As
zone
far
is a
as-
zone.
They
An
can
MDA
also,
locks in the zoning for the period of the MDA.
right,
I get it.
So
that an application also does that. But an application, you have to be a lot further in that process.
Like I said, it bypasses that process.
could this MDA be a super simple, or the
So-
zoning's not gonna change
The
for
question-
just-
But here's the other question,
That's basically what it does.
but most of the MDAs want pretty long time horizons, 15, 20, 30 year, 40 years, you know. If you did an MDA that was for 5 years or 7 years, I mean, is that,
But aren't we reevaluating them every 4 years or?
That
It
doesn't mean, that doesn't mean,
doesn't
that
matter.
means
That's
nothing.
true,
We
yeah.
need-
that's just,
That doesn't
we're
mean-
gonna,
I know that.
we're gonna agree to talk about some things, it doesn't mean we're gonna agree to make any changes, yeah.
So I guess at least my question for staff, city manager, engineer, attorney, looking at this MDA, are there, I think this may be just a different way to ask Steve's question, is are there specific things that you would suggest we include that we could only do in an MDA versus the zone?
What about, we talked about.
You're not one of those three.
Maybe I wanna be, but I got thinking earlier, but to your point earlier, we asked for one in that other Teton to not have schools, churches. Is it something as simple as that we?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Is it something as simple
I
as
think
that,
that's a
that we're
C2
getting-
zone, this is not a,
So,
this is not a.
so that zone, so this zone only allows, but it's those kind of questions, and I think one of the things, the staff, we were talking about, if you wanted your ratio, then this is where you would do that.
If we're not gonna do the ratio, is
Which I
there
don't think-
anything else?
I don't think they want a ratio, so I don't think that's a reason
So-
for them to
so-
ask.
So,
And I think
so
I'm
if you want a
against that.
schematic design of the plan, I would put it in MDA more than I would put it in an ordinance. If you, although I think,
See,
because
but all
the
that
pen
goes
doesn't
back
have
to
that.
the planning
Yeah, I don't
commission.
even care about the schematic deal of the
site
site
plan,
plan,
yeah.
because
We have that
that's
all in
all
ordinance.
regulated through all the zoning ordinance
Right.
anyway.
And that can
That's
be
not even the
modified
zone.
and
Maybe-
changed and.
yeah.
So,
Maybe
you know,
should
originally
do
what
that
we were
anyway.
pitching, if you want to use the ratio, if you don't want to use the ratio, then, you know, short of, again, if you want some other amenities put in, but think Olympia, we said, okay, we want you to do X number of amenities.
Yeah, this park and that
Because we're
thing.
giving you this, the only area you have in there is a potential trailhead area and a trail. There's some storm drain work and some properties that have to be acquired for the trail. I don't know, again,
So
There's a
maybe
couple
this
properties
is
that
a
you have
homework
property.
assignment, like think of those things that are valuable that we would put in here that we wouldn't do in the zone or that couldn't be done that way.
So I
Or
think-
that the planning commission wouldn't
Could be
do,
discussion
right?
with the UDOT property that we're currently in the process of trying to acquire, and the city will acquire that, so there might be some discussion about putting in there, maintenance agreement for them or buying it from the city to use.
These MDAs are like 13 pages, I mean, these are not complex documents, There's-
It's
they're all the same thing except for a couple paragraphs, right? So, it's not hard for us to
That's
come
what's
back.
scary sometimes.
Well, I would say it's not hard for us to make a decision on these key items, you know what I mean? Bring them back, yes, no, right? Like, that's a pretty easy thing, we don't have to go through every part of the MDA, cause they're all
Not
the
Exactly,
same, right?
we can, but tying those things together if we're gonna do them all.
Right.
But the larger question of should we, you know, what are the
Right.
key points, that's what we need to talk
Yeah.
about.
Trey,
And
Agreed.
So let's do
MDA
that
should be
then.
mutually beneficial.
So let's do that, let's have this one come back with the changes. Trey, I would challenge you guys, like, do you see what we're saying? We just,
See,
It's
just
not that
your,
we're
we
against
want
it,
your
but what's
suggestions,
the-
like what is, what,
why do you
What are
guys
the
feel like you
safeguards
need
the
on
city
this,
would get
on this
from
one right now?
these?
We're just focusing on this one.
We
If
wanna-
For
if
us
that's
to
already
weigh,
tied in
like-
right
like
now
Steve
with
said,
the AMSD
the
and
pros
the
and
zoning.
cons.
And I might say this.
Todd is spot on. This is helpful for us to incentivize others to come and to
It's a
protect
for sure, it is.
But-
potential clients.
And maybe I'll ask you then, how does that vary from what's in place now? Cause right now, there's already those assurances, cause it's zoned that way.
Yeah.
You're gonna be the landowners, unless you come to us
Zoning change.
for
Like
zoning
what-
change,
what
it
is-
can't be changed.
what
We
is
can't
it
change
Cause
they're
we
it.
can't
afraid
take
to
it,
change
right,
it.
that
We
would be
can't-
taking, right?
We could change it.
It's essentially where you
Change it.
take everything
Yeah,
that
that'd be
we
a taking.
want to a head right now, making a decision on it, and then saying that's protected.
it's
for the MDA.
streamlining the
It's
process, so you don't
streamlining it.
have to come
It's-
back,
it's
and that's
a-
okay, if that's the purpose, just say that's the purpose.
And
And
Those are good things, right? If I'm a developer, I want
And that's
those
what we're
things,
trying to,
right?
so
And
that's,
and that's,
As we approach potential clients to come and say, these are the standards and they're set for 15 years and.
you don't
this
have to
will
go
be-
through that drawn out process just to put your sign up,
Exactly.
like I get
and
that.
if we're not giving up anything in this, if we're just referring to it, then
Since it is an agreement, so we bring this to a head right now. If it doesn't work, let us know. We've tried to outline everything that we would like to agree on. And so if there's problems, this is a great place to bring it up.
So
And
what
the TIF
what
is
I'm
15
saying
years,
with
right?
that is that, and that's, if I'm in their shoes, that, I absolutely wanna do that too, and even on our side, that makes sense to a certain degree. I don't like having meetings for the sake of having meetings, right? The planning commission to see 8, 10 of the same things come through where they're gonna say the same things. But bypassing that process, right, we have to think of everything ahead of time instead of when that comes in, what are the issues with this different uses, especially, I'm not as concerned with this MDA as I am with others,
The other two.
with the different uses and everything they wanna do, so that's why I'm posing the question of what are the assurances that we get from this, or is it not needed, or or do we just need to trim it down to streamline those things, right? To help them versus bypass everything.
I feel like we've done a pretty good job of doing this in text amendment. So this locking them into that is the biggest risk. I think that's pretty minimal for the city, because that text amendment, we've dialed it in. It was pretty broad and, well, it was kind of limiting before, very limiting, because it was just new cars. Now we've got the users, we've actually put some more requirements into it.
With the design standards in there.
Things evolve and change, but if you're locked into that, if something works for us, something works for them, we've negotiated in the past to amend an agreement, add or subtract a few things. We've also had other agreements where we said if we change the ordinance, you have to follow it, or certain pieces of the ordinance. So,
So it's at least for me, cause I kinda derailed this notes of helping move it on a little bit, I would say kinda go with what we talked about, Steve's pros and cons, and really, we want your feedback. I mean, with these, it's easy to say, well, what does council want? We don't know what we want. We need the experts to tell us on your end of things, because a lot of this will come to fruition 5 or 10 years from now when things are actually getting built, and we're like, oh, we missed that on the first one, but now there's nothing we can do about it. We've had that experience with others, so bring that to bear here and tell us what we need to include if we're gonna do this, right? And then the other, I don't have anything else on this first one, it's the other three, I think, that are more complicated.
See, and I'm okay on this one, I'm okay, I mean,
So what I'm hearing is you want us to come back with what are some things we should be asking for, again,
If the ratio doesn't make sense, are there other things that
okay.
do?
and again, I think that's, like you, to your point, I think that's fairly simple even in a general meeting to come back and say, we made these changes, yes or no.
I do think we wanna include the no churches and schools, cause those can go in any zone.
That's,
Literally.
to me, that's
Schools
big
can-
enough for this area.
Right.
It's
This-
almost, right, yeah.
For
this type of thing.
Are you guys opposed to that in there to get your
If you want to
MDA?
tell that school to go away, then, sorry.
Yeah, unless they wanna build like a public works building or something.
Yeah, we're okay with that.
Okay, okay, so we'll come
No,
back,
no.
so that one can come back with just maybe some suggestions, but even if it's, for me, even if it's,
that one might not come back.
Like I
That's a
said-
big one.
Oh,
I mean,
it's a-
Might
let-
not come back
let
with
me-
any extra comments, I mean.
right,
if that's the
Like I
only
said, I'm
comment, it still might be enough.
what's that?
I'm good streamlining everything as long as we think the text is strong enough, right? We're not leaving anything away out there.
Okay,
But I think that's important for us to say, cause I don't know that we had spelled that out at this point, but okay, that's a good one to add in, would
Cause
be a
it,
good
I mean,
reason
it
to
got
have
us
an
at the
MBA.
last one. We're
Right.
supposed to have 30 acres there. The second we signed that, they went, oh, hey, we're gonna put a charter school. Nothing we can do about it.
see, you guys are suffering from other bad,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
it's
okay.
bad experiences we've had.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
it's
we
just-
have no problem with that.
So
I
just,
think as a city, we're trying to approach this on a more even footing than probably we have in the past, where I think
learning from our
development
past
has had
mistakes.
a much broader vision and understanding of these issues than the city at the time. And we're trying to up our game to say, okay, I think we now are willing to come in as equals and have a reasonable discussion about an accommodation about these things rather than one party or the other trying to dictate something to the other, if that makes sense, so.
We like that.
Okay, sorry, effort to keep it moving, let's go on to,
North of River Crossing?
Let's do garden.
let's go to garden,
Garden, okay.
we'll do
Do
north.
you want me to throw out all my things?
Which one is garden, let's get to
You throwing
the-
spaghetti at the wall?
For me, on this same
You're
day,
hot on this
page
one,
number?
let's go, man.
like for me, the issue on
Yeah,
the garden
well,
plots is if we're awarding zoning. Right, so again, to me, that's a bigger deal. We're changing the zone without going through that
On garden?
process, right? So the hotel is C2, but what they're asking you for in the MDA is that anything auto mall be allowed to be
Right,
put there
right.
without going through the rezoning process. So, I mean, that in and of itself is tough for me, right? One of the reasons I got involved in all this was I didn't like the process of how these decisions were made. But I think with this one, same thing, if the wording is tight enough, then it protects us, 'cause it's just the auto mall zone, and if all those standards are tight enough, I don't know that I have a ton of concerns. It would still have to, correct me if I'm wrong, but the process. So what I'm thinking of is where the hotel would go, and then this piece would be between the hotel and more than likely between the hotel and the houses, or on the other side. Whatever it's bordering and it's changing the use to what's next to it, then that's where the process of vetting that out.
I would
Makes
probably
sense.
put a site plan on that MDA,
So
right?
where,
Because it's smaller.
like what would that
facility.
process be when that comes in? Does that go to the planning commission and they can require that there be the appropriate buffer between uses and stuff, or is it just this is what the MDA says?
Subdivision will come to planning commission, and they'll subdivide, and then the site plans, if they're over an acre, go through a conditional use process.
That's what we have been
Looked at this package.
wanting.
I know, and
I
that's-
think
they-
it's a
they-
trade,
I was in
your team, you wanna do.
ABC.
I think we need to break it.
So,
No conditional.
265.
Sorry,
Not
say
on
that
that
again.
number, on this number.
So typically, even
This
a
number
use
right
that's
here.
permitted, if it's over an acre, we still have to go through a conditional use process.
It might be the same thing.
But this group is saying that they would like to have it be a permitted use and it'd be a staff level review, no planning commission review.
so,
And that's my concern with the change in use,
282.
right?
so I do think if the concern, if we talk about, if you want to allow a hotel to be a
Oh, the
permitted
design
use,
right.
you
Yeah,
could
the
just
rest
call
of
out
this is-
that's a permitted use, cause right now it is a conditional use in C two, and it's always gonna be over an acre, most hotels.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not concerned about the hotel, I'm concerned
The
about
other
us
areas.
awarding a different zone. Right, cause the hotels,
Well,
that's the
so
zone
that-
and that's what it is, great, but the
Except right
MDA
now it's conditional,
So-
and if this would make it a permitted use, there's
Let me see
the
if I'm
process
hearing you
goes.
right.
Oh.
You're saying if a use is on one of the lots next to occupied parcels, next to residential, and it's part of the AMSD, not the C2, you're worried that that's gonna go to a permitted use.
whatever the zoning is, right? So if the whole thing's zone C two right now, and we know there's some assurity for us and the residents that that's what it is, it has to go through this process, right? Conditional use goes through that process of where's the lighting at, and what's the buffer with the fences and the neighbors, and they do all of that through that process, right? If we just make it a permitted use and it's in the MDA, then it's a staff level review. What does that mean? Can they require that stuff, or it's just we have to talk about it and we're gonna do what we want anyway?
So.
We can still require it. Yeah, we can still require that they mitigate those impacts. It's just that we do it, you know, when we fold the planning commission process in, we have more eyes on the project. We're fleshing out potentially more concerns.
The process to
There's
me,
a
but
public
yeah.
process.
yeah,
that goes
the
through the
process to
planning
me
commission.
matters, but with,
Right.
But it still comes, it's still noticed, the
It's
public
noticed.
can come and attend, right?
But the,
It doesn't just show
the
up as a-
planning commission could issue those as
but
zoning
if it's,
right?
so
If
this
it's
is what we're
conditional
talking,
use.
if it's conditional use.
It's permitted
If it's
use,
a
just
permitted
staff.
use, it's just a staff review.
Yeah.
And they're proposing to make all the conditional uses permitted uses.
Yeah.
And so, so some of those things you're concerned about the buffer, there is a discussion, we have had a big discussion about the buffer, saying you have to do the buffer regardless of whether it's permitted or conditional. For Michael's staff to be able to say, here's a clear objective standard we're holding you to, it's better than the, what was the phrase, generally meets this? We don't want that, it needs to say, so this one says, every 30 feet with
Yeah,
the
those are already.
tree caliper thickness, 2 inches.
I know.
So I think
I mean,
that's a
so
pretty
the typical problems that we run into, like, and I guess my point is by doing it this way, we kind of have to try to think ahead through all of those issues that get flushed out during the process. We have to flush them out now
With users that we don't know who they are, or
to
what
to think
process,
through.
yeah.
The second thing that I'm even more concerned about is what this MDA would do is actually award a change in zone from C two to auto mall, wherever that ends up being, and the same thing happens,
We're
right?
doing it by agreement, but not actually changing the labels on the maps, right?
And the process, the
Yeah.
deliberative process to flush those things out, like, that's what concerns me, and if we
Put
can,
it into a separate.
mitigate those enough, like I can still be okay with it, but to me, they're asking us to do something that we're not supposed to do, is what I feel like, right, in awarding zoning that way. So just some ideas, go ahead, Tucker.
So with this, because we're doing legislative acts in an agreement, we have to follow the legislative process, like as far as noticing
Now.
the neighbor, now. So the neighbors, if they have issues with it, hypothetically, will come to the meetings and voice their concerns about
Hypothetically.
and AMSD.
It's different than when they get a notice on their
use-
door, it says it's being rezoned for this.
Well, it should be the same thing right now.
Will it notice, if we do this, will it notice to the neighbors within?
We already did it.
For
We
the,
already did it.
yeah, for the MDA, yeah.
It's part of
We
the
only
MDA.
received comments on the Crescent.
See, so that's, I mean, cause you brought that up to me and I've thought about that too, we are going through the same process, we're just going through it now.
We just have to vet all that out now, and that's what I'm saying is, we just have to think through that, cause it's
Right,
easy to say, well, we'll do that later when we do the review, but once you're vested in certain things, there's only so much you can do versus that process.
well, let's not, okay, so I think we're getting into the weeds a little bit, let's talk about the uses that we'd like to see.
So that's what's going with the, say, the auto mall, the bigger thing for me is awarding zoning without going through that process. That's what's being asked, that's the big ask.
It's done exactly in the uses section, so that might be a good thing to go
Yeah.
through. They're saying
Let's go through the
uses allowed
uses.
are the C2 uses, and then they're allowing all the AMSD uses, and then they had some exclusions.
Which I like the exclusions, to me, that's a big deal. 'Cause there are certain things they could build there tomorrow.
So realistically, right now, how many acres is the garden plots?
8 acres.
And how much of that is theoretically the hotel or a hotel potentially gonna use?
Two and a half.
Hotel's a little over 2.
So like my bigger concern is just the acreage, right? So is there a minimum, if we allow this awarding of zoning, is there a minimum acreage for an auto mall designation that we wanna have?
Or minimum subdivision, like
Right.
minimum, yeah.
So if there's an acre left over and it's not big enough to do certain things with, right?
Well, and we talked about it a little bit in the prior discussion in the text amendment, where we have a minimum frontage and building size, and I wonder
If that's
There's-
applied to it,
if it's applied to it, then they still have to follow those regulations.
that's where I'm going.
And that would be on that AMSD zone, they'd have to follow the
So-
They would
same
have to follow
MDA.
those standards in the AMSD if they're applying those uses of the AMSD zone.
So, I mean, I think we have to think,
So
what
we
is
would want
the
that in the
use?
zone, not the MDA for that.
Yeah, what is the use in the MDAs? It is motor vehicle sales. It's the only use special
In the auto zone.
to
Yeah.
AMSD. The rest of them are really commercial uses, so when we look at MSD, we're saying, can they sell cars there? I think Todd's right, if we say, here's your minimum in AMSD, if you're going to sell the cars, we may wanna be explicit in this MDA and say, if you use an AMSD use over here, you have to follow those
Standards.
design standards there.
Right.
I think it's really
Yeah.
just to sell a car.
It is. If
Is that in there?
So
if
in
it's
the-
an AMSD use, we follow AMSD guidelines.
Right, and that's spelled out. There are some exceptions, but that talks about the buffering
Which is
between
more
the
stringent.
residential use and the potential AMSD use.
See, that's where I'm okay on this one, again, it's taking out schools, it's taking out, I think we had to add again churches.
Mortuaries.
Mortuaries.
Yeah, I like this
Right.
stuff.
Churches are already prohibited in C two, right? But
No,
we could,
no.
are they?
Let me look.
I
thought
think
we-
Schools,
I thought
schools
we
and churches
changed-
can't go anywhere.
Churches, I think we
Cause they were gonna put
prohibited
one up,
churches
Churches
C
that kinda
two
changed.
in Creek Ridge, and
Yeah.
they said you can't do that, it's not allowed to.
But that could be changed in the zoning and then it wouldn't be prohibited in there.
So on this, on
Still put it in the NDA.
Yeah, sure.
on the
Using
definitions
NDA.
two, development and design standards, A,
That both
it
parties
says-
agree.
the city ordinances for C two, should that read C two and AMSD
where are you looking?
on and under the definitions,
What page
just
are we
below,
on?
page 265 in the packet, page 18 on the,
282 on the bottom.
paragraph 3, section A. Development and design standards.
Oh, for A,
So
for
that's
C2.
talking about, so if A says that if you're gonna build C2, you follow the C2 standards.
So it's just referring to if they do C2.
Yeah,
Then B says if you're gonna do AMSD, then you follow the AMSD standards in the zone.
It's just
Oh, okay,
referring,
I
it's
see.
referring to the code section.
I see, okay, yeah.
Where is B? I don't see.
It
Um,
repeats,
It's the next
it's the next page
Oh,
down.
you just described in 2A2.
Yeah, so it just refers to
So
the
it just
code, not
refers-
the AMSD.
Understood.
MDA.
Yeah, we don't call it out as AMSD, we're
Yeah,
just
okay,
calling it
that
out
makes
the
sense
code
now.
section.
Understood.
And then there's the buffer.
And then the other
buffer's
two
down on that
buffer,
page.
right.
Yep.
other things they need. And then that you're given the tree species and they can put them tighter for buffering and all that stuff, right? Yeah. So,
One thing I think would be a good exercise for the council is, since they are proposing for all the conditional uses in the C2 zone to be permitted uses, is that you look at each of those conditional uses, or even the permitted uses, and specific to this garden plot, what makes sense on this, and then you put
And
it in
exclude.
that prohibited, cause they
Yeah.
listed several prohibited uses, some of those are actually conditional uses in the C2 zone. So I think it would be a good idea cause there's,
To edit the permitted uses in the C2 zone inside of the MDA.
or the conditional, cause really the conditional uses will be permitted, so look at all the
Yeah.
permitted and
And
conditional.
uses, yeah.
And see if you wanna move it to the prohibited list, for example, there's what was the substations or
do you
something like
have
that?
the?
Is it-
There's utilities and utility substations, gas, natural gas.
Is there
substations.
telecoms?
We might wanna take those, telecommunication towers
On.
are in there, but our other code says they have to be on city
Okay.
public
Public or
property.
quasi-public properties.
So things like that, it's that, we don't want that as a permitted use for this zone, so let's move it to the prohibited section.
So that is,
Perfect, thank you, Todd.
And what we might wanna consider is, as we're moving some uses from conditional to permitted, we could still use the approval standards for conditional use and just make it administrative. And apply those to
I like
those uses.
that idea too.
So it still has to
Yeah.
go through a process.
So we're still
Have a review
holding those same
process.
standards, but we're just making it administrative
It
review
has that
process.
list of items
like
that we need to
I
address.
guess, you guys okay with that?
I don't quite
They did,
understand.
'cause then we could-
So
Mike, do you
instead
wanna-
of the conditional use
Yeah,
going
then
to
it
the
doesn't
planning
go-
commission,
Yeah.
that it goes to staff, and staff makes a determination.
Yeah, we're okay with that.
That's a great idea.
But at least we're using those same standards.
And it's a
We're making
checklist.
it
Good
easier.
stuff.
so we'll use the conditional
That
use
helps alleviate
standards,
my
but it'll be
concerns
an
on
administrative
I
process.
like that, yeah.
Okay. Garden plot good?
Now restate that so I can put it in my notes.
It's City Code 10511, which is the conditional use process and standards. So there's a section that has approval standards that we review all conditional uses against. And I think we could simply apply that to the permitted use review process.
Put that in,
It's part
and
of
it's
E,
staff
administrative.
level.
Yeah.
Administrative.
Yeah.
So
Cause that's really what the Automall Group is trying to get to, is.
And and that addresses my concern of having some vetting,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that would still be streamlined, it doesn't have to go through.
So all we need to do is just go
Planning
through the,
commission and all that
go
kind
through
of
the
stuff.
C2 uses and determine which ones we would like to prohibit if possible.
Well,
Negotiate which ones we would like to
And
prohibit.
that's that table that has all the Ps and Cs. and-
Right.
Yeah.
we might, do you want, I'm looking through, there's like secondhand store, there's a bunch of other things, those ones we wanna say we don't really want.
Yeah, I think that's part
Feel
of the
free
reason for
to do those yourselves and tell us, these are the ones we came up with, do you have any others?
Right.
Cause it
That
is
would be great.
it is a long list of conditional uses in here.
Yeah, but I think
Holy cow.
that is a really justifiable reason for an
MDA.
MDA here, right? Really good reasons, yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about a general area to be determined later, this is a
Yeah.
very small pocket
Little-
inside of.
8 acres.
Yeah.
See, can I just say
Adjacent to the
something?
auto mall,
This is
yeah.
great, because I think we really are, to me, this is a cooperative effort, cause I think we all have the same goal, so now it feels like we're all working together.
We'll go through and see if there's anything else we just can't live with, but I don't,
Yeah, it does, right?
Yeah, we read through all the conditional
thought we've been
uses
through it once before, but.
on Monday, with the developers, cause I think we were curious on, well, first we asked the question, are you anticipating all the conditional uses and uses? And they said yes, and we said, well, you have a list of prohibited uses, let's see what's left on the table. There was quite a few, and I think the developer would be okay with removing a handful of those. That's in line with our recommendation, but we can go through that, kind of vet it firsthand for you. And then,
And anything you guys aren't like in agreement on, maybe, I mean, you guys put
Yeah.
it there, whatever, then bring those to us and we can, maybe that's what you can bring up to us and say,
Yeah.
let's fight about that.
It's
Okay,
raise those concerns,
Is
even
this
if
all
not
tomorrow?
unanimous, cause we do
Powwow
the same
first
thing.
thing in the morning.
We need to
I
know.
like that.
okay,
We're coordinating.
okay, here we go, okay, Crescent,
What page? See,
That's back before this.
Or this.
77.
Sorry, which,
What is it, 277?
I can't,
Yeah.
my eyes are glazing
I
over.
can never see.
is this the actual number or?
It's
packet,
the
packet number.
Give me the
two
packet
seventy-seven of your packet.
And you really want to go
And
to
then
It
Which
doesn't have
page
that
number
number
is
should
this?
actually, that number would be 294.
294.
I'll get you, I'll get you,
Yeah.
you're using it.
I'm in there.
So that's page.
Got it, okay.
I got it.
None of these
310,
matched.
311.
No, 295, 294.
So go to the, so go to 310, cause that's.
Right, cause that's where the,
That's seven Cs, which is all
yeah, exactly,
It's
that's the,
294. This.
Okay,
perfect,
311
yeah.
and that, the 294 on.
So to keep my theme going.
Oh, so it's different in the paper,
Yes.
it's different on his and it's different, okay,
Yeah, we all got different numbers going.
okay.
They know what we're using.
We think we're on the one that says master development agreement for Crescent Commercial Development.
I'll let you
Yeah,
know,
we're
I worked
Exhibit
really hard to organize
Two
them.
ninety-four in the packet and it's
311.
311.
Yeah, we're
311
all
on the
there.
printed
Okay,
page.
so
There,
we're,
Teddy?
we're sliding forward.
I spent a lot of time when we were putting the packet together in the software, making sure it was all lined up just right, so I hope we didn't mess it up, cause that's
So the one I'm looking at is,
frustrating.
Yeah, to roll forward,
Yes.
311.
Me too.
it's like I was trying to print off certain pages, I'm like, these are like 20 pages off.
Oh, yeah. I just called Wendy and said, Wendy, can you print these for me?
That's what I should have done.
And kill a small tree. Like, I can't do this on the screen.
Like I hate to
Yeah,
ask
I mean,
people to do
just-
stuff like that.
And what we tried to do with the MDAs is originally they were proposing to put all the text as an exhibit. And really, we just wanted to see what the deviations from the zoning were, so we really pared it down to only a couple of paragraphs. In the hopes that it would be easier to know exactly what they're asking for.
Well, for this one, in kind of the same vein of the lens that I'm looking at it through for me, this one makes more sense than any of the others, right? If we're saying that it's being used in conjunction with a main anchor location on Otto Row, then we wanna have language there that ties them together as tightly as possible. So maybe take us through whatever language that is.
Is that the only ask on this one? Is AMSD uses?
Correct.
To add the AMSD uses to the other C2 uses.
Yeah, it's very similar to the garden piece where it's zone C2 and they're asking for an additional use being AMSD. And then also changing, just like the garden piece, all the conditional uses to permitted uses with a list of exceptions as prohibited uses.
So I think what we said before with that one applies to all
Exactly
of them.
applies to this, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we want
And
to
then
do
we-
with all of them.
Then we need to type, make sure that language on, I think, we've talked about that, make sure the language is tied to where it's not a storage.
Right, so
That's
it's,
in the text.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right.
we just changed
Well,
it,
no,
yeah.
so in this one,
And I think we want to put in the MDA too.
where we would say, is this where we're putting operating hours?
Yeah, we would have operating hours for that one.
I mean, it makes more sense to me that you would put it,
Yeah.
well,
It's nice to put a clause on that too, if you say this outlives the.
we would want, I think we'd want it in the zone because we
yeah,
want it to, we want it
as
to
I'm talking, I
match
think
the
I'm
auto
just,
uses.
I'm talking myself into the zone.
For the hours,
Well,
if-
for the storage.
storage and the hours,
Storage.
maybe?
Well, I don't know if we wanna get into the hours of,
of that.
I,
You wanna do that
I
in
think
the
it's the
text?
same,
Hours, but
Business.
I think it's the same, this is, regardless, it's the same hours as the auto mall. It's
No,
the
'cause
same,
you-
that's the same use.
no, cause if
No.
it's a 7-Eleven, they decide to put in there, cause that's a C2 permitted use. Those are open till,
so
24
the
hours.
only hours staff was really recommending were on that, was on the storage of
Storage.
the, and how, who accesses it. So one, I think we need to clearly say this is not self-storage.
Yeah.
Right, and Bruce said he could come up with some language, whether it should be here or in the text, I don't know, maybe that's, you and Bruce can arm wrestle over that.
I think the text would be better.
And then and in that, you know, if it's not self-storage, do you limit hours, do you want people backing up trucks and things at 2 AM and next to that residential? I think you put some hours where you say, okay,
Yeah.
here's how we do this, cause
If the business that borders residential development, then you
Yeah.
have these hours.
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah.
great point, so we wanna make sure self-storage is not a permitted use.
Yeah.
I don't think it is in C2 anyways, I think that's in M1 if
Well,
I'm.
that's-
It is in
M1.
So,
C1.
here's where I got thinking about this one, is that it's zone C2, but we're doing, again, we're awarding zoning
AMSDs.
for AMSD. If that's what's being asked, why don't we just rezone it to
I agree, and then we
Because
don't have to put
they
on
also
the
want
But 'cause it
C2.
doesn't
They
have
also
the
want
C2
flexibility
requirements,
to do
yeah.
all the C2 stuff if that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I get it. That was my biggest concern is
This is
it's
a lot of
word-
work to do for
Right.
it, right?
that when I was reading through this, the biggest concern I had about this and the garden plots one was the idea of we're just allowing almost everything, right? But I guess the counter to that is if we're gonna do the MDA, we can sure prohibit a lot of things too, right? That's a good quid pro quo, that's a good
Yeah,
give
so
and
I
take and a
think
reason to enter into
Like
agreement.
what you guys have struck on is maybe where we need to go with this is that everything we're talking about, I mean, what applies to just the auto use and what do we wanna curtail on C2, because we're essentially circumventing that process again,
Right.
Right,
right? For any of those uses, we have to think through, what if this doesn't happen or there's some left over and it's a C2? Like what
Right.
goes there?
Yeah.
I think we can go through the same process as far as getting a table prepared for you on what those permitted uses will be, what we think should be on the prohibited section. Because I think there's gonna be a difference between what you wouldn't mind as a permitted use on the Crescent versus the garden.
yeah.
And we'll try to
Yeah,
vet
those
those
are
out.
different.
And
Yeah,
I'd also
sure.
have a site plan for that MDA.
That's-
Because it's a smaller piece and
I
it's
think
a
that's-
weird,
I don't think there's
I
I
any
think we're
public
getting to
infrastructure
the
on it, though.
meat of what the
So we
good
might not
trade-off
want
is,
to-
right?
oh,
That we will
Don't wanna dictate too
grant
much
you
what private
flexibility for certain things, while you're granting us a guarantee you're not gonna build
Assurance.
some things that we don't want, right?
yeah.
And I think that's a good reason to enter into an agreement together.
And that streamlines
that's a
it for
good
both
idea,
of
yeah.
us.
Right, for both of us, yeah.
But we have to think through all those things on our end
Can we-
instead of relying on it coming back later to go through a process that we just bypassed.
Right, okay.
Can I ask for, on all of these, in order to, we could go through this in a general meeting for a while. What if we were to open the work meeting in 2 weeks with the table? Like, that's the first agenda item we go through it here, the table, and then we just take that table and then bring it into the general meeting and say, the table we talked about in there.
So, I think the way we would do that is we send it to you for the if you want it on the regular meeting as well, it would be in the regular meeting, but we could have it in the pre-meeting, you could talk about those things, you could then if you wanted to amend it in there.
Correct, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
You
We
would
can
have an
spend the time
opportunity.
here, we
have-
can spend the time there. I don't know, the optics I think are better to do it there instead of we're gonna work things out behind the scenes and then go tell the public what we did.
Well, it's still public, we would just go through the minutia here and then
I get-
recap, right?
What's the, to me, what's the difference between doing the other work meeting items and just putting it on the general meeting to do it?
Spend the time regardless.
Or are you saying do it on the work meeting and if we don't get to where we need to be, then we can just continue the general meeting?
The table you're talking about is an edited table that we've, the one we're.
Correct.
Correct, yeah.
Our
And then we
proposed
just, yeah, your proposal, then we,
MDA uses table,
Yeah.
not, that's gonna be different than
and then we
the
just go
C2
through and
or the
hash out what we
MSD,
would like, if
so.
there's anything different, we would like
So-
to.
Gotcha.
So we call out, there's buffers
Good
in
idea.
here, there's, so it's really just those uses that are different than the ones we are striking that we're gonna put in here. And again, AMSD, the one thing that's, so AMSD also, we should say it's vehicle sales, but also storage of vehicles is an accessory
As
use.
an accessory to.
So they have to have a dealership here to have.
To store.
And that can only
So-
be used as part of the
And that's
AMSD
already in the
use, right, yeah.
AMSD text.
And I think that's in the AMSD text, so we're probably
Question,
good on that.
say ABC Auto owns a place on the auto mall, but they also own the Crescent piece, can they use that as vehicle storage?
They have to have a dealership.
Has to be on site.
That has to be, and that's
It's
in
an
the text,
accessory
right?
use.
Which is
Okay,
what
just
has
making sure,
been
yeah,
discussed, I
yeah.
mean, that is
Yeah.
what's been discussed, is this
Right,
dealer would.
A boat dealer.
No, I just wanna make
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
that that's,
Dealership, yeah.
that they're
So
just not,
and
Which
that's-
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's like my main concern is that language is tight enough that it can't, that the Crescent piece isn't strictly an accessory use to the anchor location, that there's an actual dealership on that Crescent piece.
yeah,
It's just co-owned and there you go.
Yeah, it makes,
a storefront of some sort of.
I mean, if that language is, if you tell me that that language is tight, that happens, cause that's what we don't wanna have happen, right? Is that is, and even what I was thinking through is, I mean, I have lots of business clients and I think of some of the structures that they have for things, right? I'm thinking, well, geez,
Well, I know, that's what I'm thinking.
you can have somebody who owns both pieces, and they could even call it the same name, but they're running basically one business here and one business there, and technically it falls under, but Right.
Maybe we can just put a note in there that it's an on-site accessory use.
Yeah, I think we could define it and then,
That tightens it up.
Yeah.
Just that much,
Yeah.
to make sure that there isn't somebody somewhere down the road that says, oh, this is accessory because I own something here.
Yeah,
Right.
It's probably
Yeah,
into-
yeah, but I would say I can't find a compelling difference between here or that meeting, since you suggested it, let's do it in the work meeting. It's great.
Again, it's gonna be in that
We're gonna
passage,
be-
we'll still show it
Yeah,
up, we'll still
Like
show
you
it.
said, it's just going through that,
That,
right
yeah.
with that.
Okay.
Cause then the real discussion is still there. It's-
Yeah,
So
that's
then-
good work.
we're on.
North of Miller.
North of Miller,
Which is
page 244 on the PDF number, and then 261 on the bottom of the
This is
paper
the
copy.
only one that I really, really don't like. Because they're basically asking to be awarded zoning, bypass all of those processes for a completely different use,
This is,
right? And it has nothing to do with the auto mall or anything like that, so this takes me back to like Steve's comment that it was the performance-based thing, right? Okay, so I get what you're asking for and what you get from this, but how in the world does that benefit us in getting this core project
yeah, I agree.
done? So there has to be some, so my comments in the last meeting were that there needs to be something real to it, right?
Well,
Not just that they're gonna do what they're telling us right now,
Right, so
right? Is there something measurable that can be used as a trigger that gives us assurance that the core auto mall project is going to be fulfilled in that area?
yeah, so the paragraph 2B, right?
Sorry, page
That's,
number.
so it'd be 262 on yours.
Say something
Yeah.
on Steve's numbering.
So, the permit for construction of a building intended for non-motor vehicle uses until it is issued building permits for at least 25,000 square feet in the AMSD zone. I really think, like the comment said, we really need open operating businesses, not permits,
I agree.
right? Like, just pulling a permit is
Yeah,
not
and-
reason to do the
And
other stuff.
open operating businesses, is that 3-year temporary shack and it doesn't work out? Or is it open operating
Yeah.
business and a certain amount of sales tax generated that benefits us both? I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas,
Yeah,
right?
we need to define that
Any of these
better,
or,
right?
I
I'm
just
thinking
wanna
more a
know-
combination of them, so my thinking was, I badgered a few others this week, is let's have this conversation as a council, like what are those things that we can take back to them? Cause initially we just said, we're thinking along these lines, tell us what you think, and it's not quite hitting the mark for us, so let's tell them what that measurement is, that we'd be willing to award zoning, and if it's not good enough, that's not good enough, we don't need to do this one, it has no bearing on any of the rest. But if it is good enough, I'm more than willing to look at that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really, really good, if we do this, you get this, right? It's spelled out, it's very delineated. But our ask is, we need an auto mall. If you give us the auto mall, we'll give you flexibility up north to do other things.
Right.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's really the bottom line.
But the promise of an auto mall, not good enough.
Right.
Right? Again, it undermines that process. I mean, I think we've all said a million times, and I'll say it, that might not be appropriate for auto mall, might be better for C2 or even other
Yeah,
uses,
right.
you know, office building or flex space or whatever. But I really hate, again, circumventing that deliberative process for completely different use before any of this is built out, going years in the future, and it ties our hands.
Agreed.
Am I willing to take that step if we get the real auto mall? Then I'm willing to have that conversation, right?
Does the AMSD MDA lock this into auto mall zone? It's already zoned auto mall. Can we change that if it's a scenario in 5 years, 10 years, saying we got enough auto mall, this will be better C2? Can we make that adjustment?
If it's just zoned that way, we can change the zone at
But
any.
not if it's locked in the MDA.
Well, you would want it would be a joint thing, you would approach, if they're not seeing auto mall uses there, they would probably come to you and say, hey, the drive
We wanna
is,
change the zone.
This
or the
is-
C2
This
stuff.
is just building in an easier path to change that use if the auto mall's not happening. That's really what this is a
It's a if you-
streamlined version
Yeah,
to do
it's
that.
if you do this, then
Then
you
we'll give you the
get that
streamlined process,
versus if you want that, come ask us later.
Yeah, that's the difference. This is a,
So,
they earn it through a performance of the automobile.
So really, we're talking about this timing, this triggering piece that we're calling. What is that trigger and how do you do it? Right now, it says they have building permits. One of the suggestions was we really should see something operating.
And it does say 25,000 square feet of structures.
But that's two, maybe three dealerships or more.
Only 2,500 feet, that's 10.
It's 10,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what that minimum right is,
Kind of
yeah.
what I said last time is, look, there, really what at least what I'm asking for is an assurance that the three happen to a degree that gives us the belief that the rest is gonna happen. Right? So it should be
Three
fairly,
shacks on a dirt lot is not.
it should be fairly easy to calculate kind of two or three metrics, right? One is, I think is fairly easy to say, an operating business, and it's a broad definition. So the other two make more sense. Well, square footage of the buildings and things that we've outlined, what's that square footage? So again,
What's the minimum size?
let's look at comparables, right? I mean, so if we're being told these are the sizes, it should be fairly easy. We know kind of what's proposed to come, so what is that, what do those buildings look like? What are those sizes, right? Then let's dial that in. We wanna see that within that certain period
Right,
of time.
and then no more than one
And-
of them
and
to
if
be
we're
a
going to
temporary structure.
Yeah, exactly, and if we're gonna award, to me, this is the bigger one, if we're gonna bypass that process for completely different use in an area that matters, right, that we've used public money
Right.
for, in my opinion, not the best way to do this, and been to bank and carried the note, all of that stuff, like, we need to see some real return to then gift that. So, there should be, I mean, they all should have a pro forma. Ask the dealers that are interested in coming, like, what are their projected sales? Well, let's take a reasonable percentage of that. Okay, you're saying this much, well, we wanna see 75% of that during that time, right? So, yep, open on operating square footage and sales tax revenue over a period of time. And I'm open to whatever those might be, but it needs to be real, right? Show us, what's the pro forma? What are you proposing? What are, they've already given us numbers they're projecting, right? Well, those might be inflated because they really want the incentive, right? So I'm saying we can discount that a bit to something reasonable, but that's basically just saying, put it in writing that you're gonna do what you're saying, what you're telling us you're gonna do before we gift this other thing to you. And to me, this is the biggest one where I have a hard time saying, I'm going to vote to do the opposite of what we're supposed to do. That's what it means to me, right, is that our job is oversight and make sure it goes through that process and those things get vetted out. This is to me is the big ask.
Okay, so let's get into what that is then. What is that metric then? 25,000 to me tells me it's
I'm
not
open to
gonna be
whatever
the,
ideas, those are the.
well, I'm just saying, that's
It's
what
not
I,
gonna be the shanty.
I'm just
It's a
trying to
lot.
start that. 25,000 isn't more than three shacks, that's
Yeah.
up, to me, I don't wanna see, I guess personally, this is
But here's
me.
the question, if you go and you do an analysis, you determine that a minimum size for a reasonable new car dealership might be 5,000 square feet, just for
Yeah.
example, right?
That's
Well,
fine.
you could do 3 of those, or we're saying, no, you have to have 5 of those before you can do it, that's, the automobile's done, right?
I
You know?
think most of the ratio are the size of buildings, and they might correct me, but I think they're more in the 12 to 15,000 square feet is what
For
they're.
newer, I mean,
Well,
is
even
that
for
what,
these used ones that they're
well,
looking at.
Cole's talking about a massive building, I mean,
Well-
that's gonna be more than half of this by itself, right? I
And
mean,
that's kind of what I'm saying is that we've already been told what we're supposed to
Sure,
expect
I would,
with these three, so what are they? And again,
And then
they might,
let's
they might.
discount
yours?
that to give them a buffer.
What's
but-
everybody's suggestion then? That's, I mean, we know what we're
That's not
asking.
unreasonable, right?
The 25,000 doesn't seem, based on that information, doesn't seem
or,
a ridiculous ask to say. Because they could maybe do that with 2 dealerships, but we're talking 2 really nice, big, beautiful dealerships, you know?
even if the
And I'm
boat
okay
comes
with
in and you
that.
park 10 boats on the lot, you're gonna fence that in, it's gonna be a bigger square footage than the
Yeah,
building.
yeah.
We're talking about
So-
structure.
Right, well,
It's
it's
the
true, yeah,
structure.
it's true, yeah, not
Yeah, the
just,
structure plus, you know,
And I'm okay if Colby comes in and he does it all with one, I'm okay with that if we have the other 2 built in as well, right?
Right.
So it's 3 open and operating, at least the square footage, and a certain amount of,
I think that's really at the gist of it, is we're saying,
a reasonable
in order to do
expectation.
that, you've told us there's gonna be these 3. Get us 3, make it make sense, fit in with what our expectations
We're
is,
being told there's three
then,
already.
then we'll give you all the flexibility you want
Yeah,
up there.
cause this
So,
is called perform,
Yeah.
you're telling us this, perform.
But I guess what we're.
And we're not asking for more than what you've said you're doing.
Right, and I think
Goes
the
back to
give
what you
back
just
is the saying, we're reluctant to change that zoning up there. It's not something that we're necessarily desirable or
To do
desiring
this
to do.
way.
But if you do these three, we'll go ahead and do it because that's a good win for us. We'll give you guys what you want because we're getting what we want, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems a reasonable ask.
I'm curious to see what on the list in two A of the permitted uses. As we were talking internally and with the developer, is there anything on that list like restaurants or office space that doesn't need the timing trigger? That you're okay with from a zoning purpose, that this
Tax
goes in
generation,
there,
Tax generation.
but then then the trigger goes more into, we don't really want flex space.
That's a great.
And that's
See,
what we're trying to prohibit.
what I brought up to Jared and when we talked a little bit yesterday, I would like to see the flex space limited to away from, I don't want that whole thing
From the
flex space.
frontage.
Sure.
I would like the frontage to be reserved for some C2 options. I still want them to have, I don't mind some flex space back off of Mountain View. But I would like to limit maybe the area that we give for flex space and keep it off of.
And we could do that.
And then we could trigger
in
more to
that-
some C2 closer.
But
But if it's
you're asking me what they can
generating-
do right out of the, no, I would say retail and restaurants, go for it. They'll start generating money right away, boom.
Yeah.
This tax generating.
But, so, here's the thing is
Wait,
that,
that's pretty broad too.
right, when this is first brought to us is, we're gonna need all of this space for it, and even we're seeing, and even they've said already that we're not sure that we even want that there, we might need it for auto.
Right.
So I don't wanna cut our nose off to spite our
Yeah,
face,
we
right,
both
to give it
agree
away
with
too
that.
soon, I guess, to me, part of it is, for lack of a better term, the phasing, right? Get this stuff done and let the demand develop there, because if all the C2 down here is done, skip over and then start doing some there, but do we flip it and do it there before they've fulfilled it on this end that we've already changed from auto to C2?
Cause the garden plots can be a restaurant.
So,
there's
so I think
ability there.
that's a good way to go, but that's what I mean by need to think through the different scenarios. It's not just one thing.
Cause I think really we're saying, if they came in and said, hey, we've got a hotel or some other use that wants to go in that spot, are we gonna tell them no, cause you've only got one dealership open? Or would we be open to that? So I think that's what
I mean,
we're
that's what's
How
hard.
they talk to us, the MBAs can always be
Right.
amended, right? If
So-
they came in and said, hey, we have this and it's really gonna happen, we can come up with language at that point to make it happen.
Perfect, right? So we can be restrictive with the NBA to start. And if they come in and say, we have this restaurant that we were like, that would be fantastic, we can say, great, put it on the next agenda, let's change the NBA, we both want it.
Yeah.
That was the last 6 council meetings it rained. So we need more.
quite the lightning behind it.
Not as crying because we're past
Anyway, sorry.
8:30, that's all I'm saying.
You know, it was raining today as I dragged my kid to the doctor. Yeah, another doctor today. And the thought that went through my mind was, if it rains tonight, the council's gonna stop to talk about the rain.
So we can work on some timing language, and maybe it's a couple options you
Can I-
can choose to, we do need to.
I'd like to add one
Yeah,
other
that was our
permitted use here,
partners.
for definitely is, civic building.
A permitted use?
Yes.
The minus
in that-
area?
In the
Yeah.
2A?
So the reason I would say is,
We have to be careful
maybe a
because
youth
it could
center?
be civic, could be.
Could be, it doesn't have to be the city, it could be somebody else too,
Why?
so.
Yeah, you're gonna have to be specific
okay,
to do what you're
let's
wanting to do.
let's be clear, I just
Yeah.
would say spitballing, if somebody wanted to build a
Performing arts center.
performing arts center out there for some reason, and they were willing to sell it,
It'd have to
Be a
be
great
way
draw.
triggered out because it doesn't generate a lot of tax.
But it would bring a lot of people to.
I say,
but it would
but
bring
it would
everything
bring-
to all the
it would
restaurants and everything
bring
else around there, and the hotel.
that
Help
element to
drive
it, which could
economic.
support it, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm willing to.
I mean, that's the same thing with the
It's
other
like
areas
it's the
there.
same
acres,
thing.
yeah,
I mean, it's a draw, right? Obviously,
Make
they're
sure you
gonna have a
the right
restaurant
Same
wording
thing.
and
some
all
sort
that
of.
kind of stuff. And the
yeah.
other part of the timing, right, is that I think we also wanna make sure that the property continues to get taken down in the right order, right? As we said before, there's, none of that is in stone. We just have the timetable they've given us that they intend to do. Nothing
Is there not
ties
a
it to
progression
that.
of
We
a,
could-
takedown?
There's no requirement.
Well, there's
But we can put that in the MDA, right? That we want that to continue with the table that they gave us.
Well, but the table is based on the contract they have, so they're, if they were to default on that, then they lose the ability for the next bid. Right, so
Right,
they're
so
under
well,
contractual
what I'm-
obligation to buy the property in a certain.
What I'm getting at is, and say this might not be an issue, but it could be if we give an incentive like this to trigger, right? Is instead of taking down the next auto mall piece, they jump over and take down the north of Miller to turn it over and then it delays the next pieces of the auto mall.
Yeah, because I think right now, the way that contract is written, they
could.
can choose what they take down at any time.
So again, not stuck in anything, but if we're gonna use this tool, let's put in some safeguards to make sure that the auto mall happens.
Right? Yeah, and then they're reasonable, because
I mean, it's the table that they
Yeah,
gave
yeah,
us, they
right.
intend to take it down in that order, well, let's just codify it, right, if we're using this tool. And part of that is that needs to be done by 2026, I think, is the date they have on this one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's part of this timing, so hopefully, if they can do it sooner than that, and these others sooner, fantastic, but if not, the others get done, right? And this builds out, and whatever the uses are.
And I think there's one statement to be made about all this, is that reasonable requests to make modifications to the MDA will always be considered.
Yeah,
Right? Like that's
absolutely.
always an option. If something comes up now and you need to jump ahead and it makes sense and it's a desirable thing, yeah, bring it over. Let's make it happen, right?
Right.
So one.
But I think if we're gonna do this idealistically, we would be more conservative and then say, come back and ask us, give us a reason to make a change, yeah.
Especially if we're talking about future things and triggers, well, we need to be more careful up front,
Right.
right? And we can be more flexible as we go.
Agreed.
So in the permitted uses, you're talking about a performing arts center.
Yeah, exactly. We could just list it specifically as that.
I, as staff, my recommendation, I have heartburn with number 7, just because I see how those.
Me too.
End up being.
And
So
number
I would
3.
Recommend that go away. So number 3, we had talked about that before, that would be like, a rental yard or something, so if that's something you have an issue with, we should strike it now. Whatever you have an issue with.
Well,
I
the
would
tough
just
thing
say-
with a rental yard, cause you could have say a Cat dealership or Kubota came in and they rented equipment.
Could be
Or
very-
even auxiliary, if you're auto body shop and you have a rental car, right, or a loaner car.
If we talk about it, there's certain kinds of, equipment rental, I think about, deal rental, was in my.
Yeah.
I don't know if I,
But we
On
don't have
90th?
anything out
Yeah.
here.
yeah,
We don't,
Well,
well,
that's,
Home
I was
Depot,
thinking about
yeah.
like heavy equipment,
Yeah.
right? Like,
that's interesting, yeah.
I wouldn't
Okay.
want, I mean, that's
Right.
need it, and I wouldn't mind having
Sorry.
stuff like
Yeah.
that, but.
Or
is
say
there- but is there lang-
motorsport, say you want a side-by-side or motorsports or
withdrawn.
ATV, right, yeah, so.
But is there language
Should
we
we
can use to
define
tighten
that
it up
in
to those
any other
things that
code
would
section?
prohibit other
Probably not.
things?
Well, they're not
Undesirable.
asking for a lot of permitted uses, so it's just really looking at the 11 things that they have listed. Like I said, is there anything in that list that you're okay with if they were to get a building permit that they could put in today? And you talked about restaurants and retail. So we separate that from this timing trigger, rather than,
Yeah.
okay, they need to have performance before we're willing to give away warehouse or light manufacturing.
What if we were to say a limited area?
I think we still keep it with the timing trigger, with the same idea that it's tighter now, and if they come and ask for it, we can change it. Like, if it makes sense to change it to that restaurant or whatever, we can change the MDA to
Yeah.
allow it.
Because we preserved that area for
For
the
auto
auto
mall, and there's a
Right.
huge C2 area that's not
Yeah,
done
there's.
yet on.
And
And
there's
then
other
there's gonna be C2
C2
over by the
areas
garden
in that-
lots, and there's,
Yeah,
yeah.
Is
there's
that also
C2
the-
areas in
And there's all
that.
the C2 uses at the Crescent if they don't
So
put the
we
thing in
can-
there, right, yeah.
Is
We
north
can
of
allow it
Miller
later,
all
but
auto mall
AMSD.
currently right now?
AMSD.
Yes, okay.
It's all AMSD right
so
now.
I'd rather it still be
We're
the
saying
same
that if you
trigger
execute
for
on the
now.
rest of the
Yep. Then you
AMSD,
can have options.
then we'll change it up there,
Yep.
yeah.
And
Okay.
again,
And
based on what I'm
we're
hearing,
guaranteeing we'll change it if they do certain
Yeah.
things.
based on what we've been told, it sounds like this stuff should be pretty quick. If the 3 happen that are saying they're gonna happen.
So we need to work on that trigger language, we won't worry about the other piece that we were just talking about. One area that I have a concern, which is in that next section, 3, development design standards in
The
B,
M1, yeah.
where
Yeah.
it goes, M1 has no standard.
Right.
So I would say if they're gonna do something, they probably should be following C2 or the AMSD.
It seems like if you're AMSD everywhere to the south, the AMSD standards that they
Yeah.
proposed would be very consistent and flow through.
Yeah.
That would make
I would
most
agree
sense
too.
to me, that they, all those, so essentially, all AMSD would use the AMSD standard, we just
Yeah.
created.
Yeah,
There's a lot of risk with the
property,
M1,
right, yeah.
Cause there's no standard.
Yeah, we already got burned one.
So when we talk about the M1, we're not talking about M1 uses. I just wanna
He
be
doesn't
clear.
fix it.
How,
He's never getting anything.
I think there's a
I would just
complexity here.
strike M1 because I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with the M1,
Zones.
but there's a complexity here about
But the end users are accepting.
Good.
would you apply the same glass and brick standards to a flex space building up there? It doesn't make sense.
There's a
right?
pretty
Or a
good range though,
warehouse.
because the range says 15 to 85, so it seems like 15%.
And if
Okay,
we have,
that's-
a- and
that's
if we
not-
have
that's
it
not-
go
okay.
through that review approval process, right, for the conditional whatever. That should
It was
have the
something
same
like that.
process.
Flex
Yeah.
space is a conditional, I think it's permitted here.
I think we're gonna
Well,
make
we
it
would, I
permitted,
think,
yeah.
but we would
Well, you
do
have
it,
that
what
But
we
we could
talked about
specifically
earlier.
Yeah, we're gonna
call that
make
out
it
as a
permitted.
Conditional, staff conditional use process is what we call it.
In every MDA, that should, they should have to go that conditional staff review thing that he.
So we're gonna change that to say AMSD design standards, they're just gonna comply with the same the design standards we've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
negotiating. That's good, M1, first time I read that, I
They started going through
Well, I
that
think
on
their
Monday.
idea is if they're building M1 style
Type uses.
properties, they want that.
Same
to
thing,
the-
kind of, I think to your core concept to
I know.
that is, if they bring something in and it fits and we wanna change it, like we can
That's
change
true,
that
yeah.
easy, right?
Yeah.
On a side note, we probably need to bring the M1 zone back.
I was gonna say that on
Yeah, exactly, right, yeah.
Separate thing.
I was, we need to.
Yeah, I think we were.
You'll probably see that
on
come
that
pretty soon.
one, so I think we just got.
Yeah, I think there's some other properties gonna be doing that too, so.
Anything else?
That's good stuff, man. I think that's-
Is that every, did we
can
have
get
any
through these
other,
Pretty quick next time.
We have one more.
that's
we
all
said
the,
that's all of them.
that was all four.
Oh,
We've got two point one.
We do have 2.1 to do, I'm just, we're
This
done
will be
with
quick.
this.
Any other comments, questions you guys have while you're here?
No, how do we work on the triggering language? Cause I know that's still, is that something
Have your
we'll
people call our
discuss?
people.
Okay, perfect.
You guys are meeting first thing tomorrow?
That's one that,
Trey, do you wanna come to the
Okay.
meeting morning with us?
okay.
Trey,
think you heard
you guys wanna come to the meeting with us tomorrow morning? At 9 AM?
I have a conflict on for that meeting.
You're gonna have to cancel.
I can be there for a little bit and then I've got a meeting.
Michael and
So
I
just
can
just
start.
for the record, what at least I'm gonna be looking for there is show me how you came to that, what's the justification for that number, I don't want something just pulled out of the air, yeah, we think this is fine, it's on the low end, show me how, like, that, the pro forma, right? So what are these planned for, this is where we're at, this is what we think is reasonable, that's where we wanna be reasonable.
I want it open.
No, but are you talking about the 25,000 square feet in the ground or
Yeah,
the
all the
operating
trigger
area,
language,
the
yeah.
ABC, the
Yeah, let's see what that language looks like and how that gets calculated.
That's what you're asking,
Exactly.
right? So I want, I
Little
mean,
bit
at least for me,
different
Showing 3 years
show me how
sales.
you arrived at it, what's the
Oh, for sure,
justification,
no,
not just a
no.
number that's
I just want it open.
some sort of,
I think it needs to
You
be more
want
than a
it
building permit. I need it to be
You
operating.
need it operating, you don't have necessarily,
I
so
don't
just
necessarily, if
can
we're
it
gonna ask for
be
three.
so they've got a building permit, they're under construction, they're operating with an interim facility. They're building a building, is that gonna trigger, or do you want that building
Well, you're
complete?
still gonna have that
For
certain
3
square
years,
foot.
yeah.
If we keep that square foot, it's gonna be,
They gotta wait till the building's
I
finished.
think that maybe
Or
come
it's-
with 5 ideas.
Yeah.
And let us figure out.
Okay,
Well,
we'll try and
I
give you
really
a
want-
menu.
Yeah.
I really want to
see.
see,
down.
Okay.
I really want
Rather
to
than
see.
having to hammer it up tonight, just come with some ideas,
I
because
really
I
wanna see
think a
part
lot
of
of it
it
has to have
as
some
Aaron
research.
sales
What are
tax.
the normal?
Well, I
sizes?
just wanna know where I should be
What's the
what we should
minimum
be
amount of sales
focusing
like
on.
that Geico
generation.
commercial. Can I get some chorizo with that?
You
what are we talking
understand, you
about?
understand
We're
the
gonna-
intent,
totally
is
agree.
to make sure that things are really,
I think you understand, I think they
Before.
understand. I think we
Yeah.
can
We'll
make
try
it
and
work.
come up with
Makes
something
sense.
you can
yeah,
pick, you know, it's more like the sauces, do you want this one, this one?
exactly.
I can get carried away on
It
some
seems
of
to be
that
like the
stuff,
most
let's not-
complicated thing we need to work through.
Yeah,
Let's
you
not
don't
make
have
it
to even
crazy.
come with
So
more than
maybe we can
5.
send that out as a memo.
Yeah, get us that.
Like I said, like combination of
If you get too many choices of candy, then we
don't think
don't know what to
that's-
think.
I don't think so either.
Narrow it down.
Okay, I think we'll work, we'll try and figure this out.
Give us the food truck menu, not the sit-down restaurant menu.
Yes.
So are we on to 2.1 now?
Go on to
I think we
2.1.
know what we're doing.
Sound equipment, do you wanna buy it or not? No, just kidding.
Exactly what you said.
That's a pretty good
conversation. Have a good night.
So we
Yeah.
just went out to bid, we
Should've
received
done
5 bids back, and it looks like there was an error in your packet, the discussion piece got cut off. I'm gonna blame this computer because it's new and it deletes things and I don't know why. But one of the things that you need to consider is with the new nonprofit group, if they're taking arts council, if they're doing some events, that will be part of the MOU as well. How do we rent that? How do we borrow that out?
Well, and I think another part of it would be, it would affect the amount of money that we would give to them if they, because
Next
they wouldn't
budget
need to
year.
rent that stuff
Yeah.
anymore, right? So,
Maybe they would, maybe we rent.
What are they renting from us?
Yeah, maybe.
Are they?
so we're gonna give them the money to pay us $30,000 to rent the equipment that we bought?
Oh, yeah, I know, I know,
But
That
it-
seems a little weird.
but
And
it's
Money
okay.
choose how to do it, right? They don't have to use
Yeah,
ours,
that
they can use
pencils
someone
out.
else.
Yeah.
That's true.
Some of the challenges we've gone through, I'm worried about storage, it has to be
Storage,
kept
I was
inside.
gonna say, that's my,
We do have Old City Hall, we just have to find some
So,
how, where to secure, 'cause
per-
it has to be secured.
Per Jesse, who we've been working with, he says that once this is all packed in the cases and the boxes and all that stuff, he said it in an 8x10 room, it's totally fine.
Alright.
Like it would all fit in there just comfortably, so that would be like half of that
Thinking the
conference room down there.
Rose Canyon, Rose Creek,
Conference.
conference room that nobody can use because it's full of stuff. Like just turn it actually into a storage room
Storage unit.
instead.
Yeah, and I
Or
think
we
it would
could
be
have-
good in there.
But we do
Old
have
City
Old City
Hall.
Hall.
Or if there's another place that we could talk about,
So
but
do we
it
have-
doesn't need to be a large space to store the equipment that's on that list.
It's about a box truck.
But it saves us a lot of
Yeah,
money.
maybe not even quite that big, yeah, a little small.
Right? But it saves us quite a bit.
It's gonna be a lot when
The
it shows
other-
up.
The other, yeah, it is gonna be a lot. The other thing to consider is we don't have anyone on staff to run this stuff, right? We don't have a technical specialist.
Are-
Nathan said I could go to Nashville and learn how to do it.
Nashville's the
She
only
wants a
place.
3-year sabbatical to learn how to go do.
3 years.
Learn how to
sound.
fix
So there
sound
are-
tech.
There are lots of tier one sound technicians that you can contract with to do the operation for you.
Will they use the equipment provided to them, or do they bring their own?
Just for example, the deal that we signed with the sound provider for Harriman Days provided the exact same mixer that we have to the Party Crashers.
So
And
what
their
would
sound
they,
technician ran it,
so I,
that box, so.
for this, I'm
There's
not,
also two boxes in this now, two consoles. One is a more sophisticated one, the Midas one, and then there's a smaller one that's a lot less sophisticated
For
that
smaller stuff.
most of the rest of us could operate pretty easily.
my question is, so so I'm thinking city use, like the arts council thing can run it themselves or
Yeah, they
hire
can hire
someone,
them,
whatever
right.
within their budget. For us, for what we use it for, what would it cost us every year
It
to
wouldn't.
pay someone to come do it?
We wouldn't need any special operator for almost all of our city uses except for the big events, i.e. the rodeo and the
Town days.
It's-
maybe town days and the, so,
35 an hour for a tech.
it's not that much. Like $150 for a night.
But currently,
So-
when we rent it, they set it up,
They
or
do all
does
of it.
staff set it up?
And
No,
Okay.
they do it all.
just to point out, the person who has worked for the contractor who's done our sound in the past,
Tom?
yeah, well, he's got a Jesse who's
Okay.
done all the sound for us in the past. He runs the sound for the musicals and stuff.
Yeah.
He has said that he would contract to do that work with us for $150 a night or whatever it is. It would not be
set
expensive.
up and everything,
Yeah, just the same thing he's done. We just pay him for the work.
first time
Yeah.
instead of the equipment.
So I don't know that we wanna, the city doesn't do anything complicated enough to justify training somebody to do all that. We would just do it for those
Sorry,
couple of
I
events.
think we do, I think we
I'll
should go to that.
Thank you.
I think we need to take a trip to Nashville.
Sure.
Teddy wants to go with you.
I would say that, so, Jesse Edgel, who's the one who's consulted with us on this, has said, when we get everything, he would like the interested parties that would be responsible for and overseeing the equipment to come out and help unbox, assemble, identify, label, understand how it all goes together. And he said he's happy to teach the basics of how these things put together work.
That way, when he comes back to
And
run it,
there's
he doesn't
video
have
on
to do
YouTube.
it.
Right, yeah, that kind of stuff, right? And so Jesse could operate it too, but his travels make him unreliable for some of these things, but, there's a solution, there's a tier one level, sound engineer you can get for inexpensively, and there's lots of them.
There's probably YouTube videos.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a YouTube video for this one, this might be a little more
Well,
than
and
that.
I do think with the nonprofit, you're gonna have some people come out that are gonna
Right.
be.
Right.
There's some people in the community.
You're gonna have a few
yeah.
people that are gonna.
Like I said, I'm not worried what they do on that side, I'm more worried
On
on
the city
our
side.
Does this benefit us more now, or, I mean, now that the nonprofit's stepping in and taking some of this responsibility? Does it make sense for them to purchase it through their budgetary things, or would it be a equipment that we wanna
That's a
house
good
and
question.
Discussion for you all.
I think it's a really good question, and I think you make a good point. I think the option would be,
I think the numbers
There's a-
still make sense, right?
Yeah,
Because
the numbers
just
do.
for what we use it
Right,
for,
yeah.
it was on the report, you said it was like 35,000 a year, so 2 years worth justifies this.
Agreed,
Right.
there, yeah.
I think it pays for itself pretty quick,
Yeah.
one
Does
way
it-
or the other.
Is the nonprofit gonna take over some of those larger city events?
If they do.
I
if
think
we rent it to
ideally,
It's not for a while.
eventually,
Okay.
them. But couldn't we rent it to them? I mean,
You could, or it could be part of the MOU that's part of
Yeah.
their.
They get to use it,
but
yeah.
then they're.
We let
if
them use it,
reduce
but
their
it reduced the budget, right,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, same thing
Yeah.
as renting.
We're gonna pay for it some point,
the idea is
some
if
way.
we reduce their budget, it pays for itself in 2 years.
Agreed.
That's the way to really justify the expense of it.
And
The ancillary
With just
uses
the
for,
arts council.
for just the arts council.
Yeah.
Even if you can't use it for the rodeo or all of Harriman Days, but you use it for Night of Lights, you use it for the Howl, and you use it for city events, and you use it for other stuff that aren't these massive productions, you cut off all those savings for years as well,
How
right?
long, yeah, what is the lifespan of this equipment now?
7 years.
Assuming that we don't lose anything, or that nothing goes missing.
Right,
Or gets
Probably
broken,
requiring, yeah.
5,
Yeah,
7.
you're gonna have a budget every year to replace things that get
Okay.
damaged.
Mics are gonna break,
And our
cords are gonna get,
So that's what we're talking
In-
about, the
in our-
5,000 and-
In our
Yeah.
capital improvement plan, we probably, if we buy this, we probably need to, in that 5th or 6th year,
Put
say,
the same amount
we're
in
putting
there
that
again.
money into, to replace. Now, there may be parts you don't have to replace,
right,
right? Some of the, maybe if you're
some
buying
of
the
the
exact same
tables or
thing, you don't,
stands or.
or the case, maybe it's the same case, you don't have to replace that, so we'll have to play it by ear, but by using that longer range capital plan, we can start to say, we know we do the same things, we'll be doing the same things with our servers, right?
There's
We
another
know in
option
the last 7
too.
years, we have to replace it.
There's another option too, to say, in 5, 6, 7 years, who knows what the nonprofit's needs will
just
be, who
gonna
knows
say,
what the
yeah.
city's needs will be.
Yeah.
And it could very be say, no, the city only needs to spend $15,000 and buy a small
We don't need.
isolated system.
Yep.
Anything else,
The nonprofit.
the nonprofit can do, we can adjust the MOU
So-
if we need to, or maybe they're making enough
It's just
revenue
their
to just
own.
buy it there themselves.
So what we do is we start with the idea that we're replacing it, as we get closer, we'll be refining
Yeah.
that number as it's moving forward, and
Yeah.
you'll find out, hey, this one device has got a much longer life than 7 years, this one, we know we're replacing every 3 years, so we need to be dealing with it.
I like that.
And this looks like the budgets came in smaller than we were anticipating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's really the two, honestly, the difference is Sweetwater has everything.
Yeah.
They've been holding it for us, waiting for us to get our stuff together.
So, but the four
No.
AV is cheaper.
Yeah,
But it includes
but it doesn't-
most of the specified.
They don't have
Well, it
everything.
just says some
It's
components
missing
missing
some
from the quote
pieces.
at the time. Have they updated their quote?
They have said that there are certain components they cannot provide.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem is the supply chain in this stuff is.
Yeah.
If they hadn't have if Sweetwater hadn't have held those materials for us,
Would've been gone.
they would be in the same problem. They would be like, we
I
can't
just
do.
wanted to, cause I know
lot of
you're
this
aware
stuff.
we have to take the lowest bid, right?
One,
Yeah. That's, I was
There were 5
thinking-
components that
emailing me.
That's our
Probably 'cause I
compelling
looked
reason
at
not to take
Yeah.
the lowest bid.
Yeah,
And they also were not
Yep.
willing, I believe it was that, to provide the initial education.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and they also have, like, they put into the bid Sweetwater did for free, like I think it might be 2 years. I know it's 1 year for sure, but I can't remember if it's 2 years. Where you can call them at any time and they have tech pros that will come and teach you how to wire this up and fix that and solve this problem and that kind of stuff too, so.
So you know what you're doing,
Well, we need to figure out where the money's coming from.
so that'll be part of the
I
budget
guess
amendment.
it's part of, it'll come out of arts and events and.
We'll have to discuss if we can move money around or what will have to come out of fund
So it'll
balance.
be part of.
We'll use it for a raise on the week.
I hear there's a spreadsheet somewhere, right? We can just move around.
There you go.
Sorry.
For what it's worth, my vote would be to say that I think we require the equipment and then we direct staff to figure out how to make the budget arrangement.
Kyle and I will chat.
Police, right? So are we done
Okay,
with this session?
okay. Look for a motion to go to,
No.
Wendy, thank you, that's been,
I'll be
A
glad
project.
That was the
Okay.
hardest
to make
meeting
a
I
motion
think
to
I've ever.
temporarily
been-
recess the city
that's
council
been
meeting,
a
convening closed
thing.
session for the purpose of
Don't know what I'm bidding.
discussing reasonable litigation and the purchase exchange of lease
Jessica's
property
good help.
provided by Utica.
I'm gonna buy him
Annotated
lunch or
52
something.
ordinance.
motion by Sherry, second by Teddy. Steve,
Yes.
Jared,
If we have to.
Teddy,
Yes.
Sherry.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Four out of four.
Powered right through that.
Moved and closed.
I'm so quietly
I
too.
forgot about closed, Jack.
Jackie, when we're broadcasting, if we use one of our computers to show something, will it be recorded or do we have to use the data?
You kids have fun.
Thanks, Chief.
I just wanna show that.
See ya.
You just want